Welcome everybody to the third episode of Astro Adda, hosted jointly by Regional Science Center and Planetarium Calicut and Committee for Public Outreach and Education, Astronomical Society of India. I would like first to invite Mr. Binoy Dubey, who is the in charge of the project coordinator and curator of the center, and he has taken up the center very recently. Sir, can you please welcome the gathering?
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Ganguly, and namaskar, friends. Thank you so much to be here with us for this online session. Wishing you all a very happy, prosperous Onam in the evening of this Astro Adda. Stay healthy and alert. With that, we begin today's session. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our resource person, Professor Mayank Goyaji, who took out his precious time and today he is here with us. After our last two episodes that were about a journey to sun and minor bodies in the solar system, today we have come up with a new and interesting two online episodes that is about astronomical belief and culture in tribal peoples. Friends, according to our 2011 census, we have 10 million people, that is 8.6% of the tribal population in India, and Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat and Jharkhand have more tribal population than any other states. And together they contribute at least 50% of the total tribal population. So overall, there is a literacy rate is 58.96%. More than 600 tribal or ethnic groups are found in India. And these tribes have their own living culture, art culture, mythological and intellectual knowledge, which are very indigenous in itself. So the perception of an astronomical elements or phenomenon may be different for each individual tribes. So today, with our resource person, we'll try to explore the perception and traditional knowledge of these people from the locus of their understanding of astronomy, their beliefs and interpretations towards an astronomical incident. These tribal people have a different, unique perspective to assaying the sky, and they always try to connect the astronomical incidents and seasonal changes with their community culture, environment, animals, and living habitats. So beyond modern and rational science, these old tribal people have a different intellectual and ethical knowledge towards astronomy, which affects their living habits, eating habits, and social customs. Though with the penetration of the information technology and smart devices, the beliefs and knowledge are changing. So today we'll try to discuss all these aspects on this online session. And cutting my narrative short, I welcome once again Professor Mayank Goyaji, and over to Mr. Ganguly for the.
Thank you. So before we start, actually, I will just introduce the speaker to the audience. Mayank Goyaji has completed his PhD in astrophysics in 1994 from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. After completing his PhD, he continued to work at TIFR until his retirement in 2018 as professor. During his research career in TIFR, he worked on making and operating space telescopes that were flown on American, Russian, and Indian satellites. For the past 2 decades, he has been interested in the history of science and astronomy, as well as the impact of science on society, as well as evolution of civilizations. In the context of history of astronomy, he has been interested in megalithic astronomy, tribal astronomy, rock art astronomy, astronomy of monuments, as well as ancient texts. He has published more than 250 research papers during his career, out of which more than 50 are on his interest in the history of science and astronomy. He has edited 7 books and published 4 books and has made 4 science films, including one on gone astronomy. He initiated the astronomy as well as Junior Science Olympiad program in India and guided them for more than a decade. He was also the director of Nehru Planetarium in Mumbai for a year. He is a fellow of several academies nationally and internationally and has been on the list of referees of several national and international journals. He has served on the governing council of Deccan College, Pune, and Anantacharya Indological Institute, Mumbai, and has been on the board of study of Yashwantrao Chauhan Maharashtra Open University. After his retirement, he started an innovative school of mathematical science as Narsi Monji Institute of Management Studies, a deemed university in Mumbai. So, sir, we have a wonderful speaker today. So the stage is yours. Please.
Thank you very much, sir. So let me share my screen first. Okay.
You have to make full screen.
Yeah. So good afternoon, all of you. First of all, I want to thank the planetarium at Calicut and my friend Jayant for inviting me. And of course, I can see my other friends here, including Arvind and so on. So thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to talk on a rather interesting topic, in the sense that it is not something that we give a thought to. We generally assume that tribals know less about the world than people in the cities and all that do. And because they don't have exposure to the kind of technology that city people have, you would think that that is correct. But in reality, they have their own knowledge system, their own capabilities, and they are far better adapted to their natural environment than we city people are. Also, their intellectual traditions are also remarkably interesting, because because these traditions have risen on their own, from their own experiences, from their own life, etc. In many ways, they are very different from those of the mainstream population groups, or urban population groups, if you want. Astronomy is one interesting subject where only recently technology has come to play, and until recently, what counted was our ability to see the sky and connect the stars in the sky and make any patterns that you want. The patterns that you use in standardized astronomy is common to not only India but Europe and rest of the Asia, because these were decided very early in 3000 BC by Babylonians. It is Babylonians in present-day Iraq, living on the coast of, living on the edge of the river Euphrates and Tigris in Iraq, who were the first civilization dated to about 3000 BC, or slightly predating Harappans. And they were avid astronomers, and they were the first ones to divide the sky into constellations, give constellations their shape, etc. These shapes were adopted by all other cultures at that time. Each of them, of course, gave a different name to it. So there are variants between what we call Orion, what is a story we attach to Orion, or what is a story that European attached to Orion, or what the Indonesians, for example, attached to Orion. So the same Orion looks like a turtle to the Indonesians. It looks like a boat to the to Australians. It looks like a hunter to the Europeans. It looks like a deer and a hunter, and related stories to the mainstream Indians and so on. So the stories vary. The shape, what that shape represents may depend from culture to culture. But the larger division of the sky is common amongst the common cultures, as it were. But tribals were not affected by this. They were not required to accept the standard, and they weren't even bothered to be connected to people who had this standard. They had their own idea of what the sky was, what the sky meant, what was important, what was unimportant, and so on. And therefore, they represent a completely independent tradition of looking at the sky. And therefore, if you're looking at the sky, and if you're wondering how different people looked at different how different people looked at and interpreted the sky, essentially looking at the tribal astronomy is the thing to do, because everywhere else astronomy is standardized with only minor differences from culture to culture. The second point that I want to make is that there is some amount of urgency in doing what we are doing, which is that tribals are now being integrated into the larger community of Indians for various advantages to them, so that they have access to medicine, etc., and education. But that also means that these traditions of tribals are being forgotten. And so you need to, and if once they are forgotten, once that generation is gone, you will essentially not get access to that knowledge and information. It is therefore important to record it right away. For example, a lot of Nicobar information has been lost. So we went to Nicobar to document their astronomy, but a large fraction of that astronomy is already destroyed because the tsunami that came from Indonesia a few years ago wiped out large villages, and especially selectively the elders, because the elders could not run away from the rushing waters. So already we are losing information at an immense rate, and we need to record it and document it as fast as possible, because otherwise it will be lost forever. And before I actually start on my main story about tribal astronomy, I want to highlight this point in one way. Several years ago, so there's a big shipping traffic that goes from India to West Asia, of course. And one of the major shipping companies used to take its ships from India to Oman and so on, West Asia. And one year there was a storm on while one of the ships was traveling, and the storm pushed their ship onto an island, underwater island, where it got caught in the sand. And no amount of modern technology could pull it out. And therefore, the shipping company was essentially told that the ship had to be dismantled and destroyed right where it was. And that was the end of the story. Until one of the executives of the shipping company said that let us take one last chance to go to the fishermen of Mumbai. And they went to fishermen of Mumbai, one of whom pulled out a couplet that he remembered from his young days, which said that the tide at that particular location was maximum on a particular day of the year. And so the shipping company waited for a particular day of the year, and sure enough, the tide was sufficiently high that the boat could be lifted up and moved out. The entire ship was saved because somebody in the ancient times, while going from Mumbai to West Asia, had recorded that on this day at this time, the tide is highest in this part of the sea. There is a lot of this traditional knowledge, which is not just curiosity, but can in fact be important because it comes as a distillation of years and decades of centuries of experience, and we should not be complacent about losing it, because we will be losing a lot of very important heritage information. So it's worth remembering, and I will also show you that in some case, at least in one case, we could document the origin of a community back to about 1000 BC, that is 3000 years ago, because of the astronomical knowledge that they remembered from their past stories. So there is a very rich collection of stories that you get from tribals. In one case, we have actually documented the record of a supernova, which dates back to 3000 BC, which is the oldest painting recording a supernova remnant, a supernova explosion in the sky in Kashmir, in Burzaham in Kashmir, which dates back to 3000 BC, which is the oldest rock art showing a supernova explosion. So there is a rich variety of information that lies and is available amongst the tribal people of India, and we are in fact doing ourselves a great service by making sure that we record this information, we store this information, because we never know when it will be useful and what kind of information lies in there. So that is my introduction to astronomy of some Indian tribes and why we should study it, because there is a lot of knowledge there which needs to be studied. Before I begin, I want to give this credit to some people. First of all, the work was done through a grant provided to us by Tata Trust, and we are grateful to them. It was done while I was at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. I retired from the 3 years ago, so some of the knowledge is dated. There were also many private citizens and scientists who helped us along the way, and I don't even have the time to thank all of them. The work was largely done between 2011 and 2018, and I will show you the work that was done. In 2017, we were in fact invited by the National Astronomical Research Institute of Thailand, and we demonstrated to them about how astronomical knowledge of is to be extracted and recorded, because of the fact that we have had this experience for such a long time. Amongst the people who are involved, there's a large number of people who are involved. The most important probably is Ganesh Halkare. He is an advocate in Amravati. He actually holds a master's degree in anthropology and archaeology, and he is a very keen student of tribal groups. So all the work that we have done and more has been done with Ganesh Halkare. The other important person in this group is Kishore Menon. Technically, he's a PRO in TIAFR, but he's been very interested in these ideas of prehistory, etc. So for several excursions, including the trip to Andaman, to Nicobar, Kishore Menon was a part of that story. Then I should also remember Dahedkar, Purushottam Dahedkar, who works with Ganesh Halkare and who has helped us map the central Indian tribals. Then there is Ramchandran Goswami and Joseph, whom you will of course recognize from Regional Science Center in Kazikode, because we work together on one particular tribe's astronomy, and that was very interesting, and I will mention that as the time comes. Then staff of Nehru Science Center at Nagpur, and the reason why I remember them is because one particular tribe that we studied, Gonds, had a very, very detailed knowledge of astronomy and the detailed ideas about astronomy, and we weren't sure we could understand everything by what they were talking to us. So we requested the Regional Science Center at Nagpur to kindly let us use their planetarium. So for 3 days, these tribals from Nagpur region came down to the city of Nagpur. They stayed in Nagpur, and for 3 days we spent together in the planetarium at Nagpur, understanding various aspects of the sky that they knew. So I should also remember to thank the Science Center at Nagpur, because they made some valuable addition to the knowledge, and that is how we are confident that the sky mapping that we are talking about is not something we have just discussed. We have actually put them at the planetarium where you can show the entire year sky, and then looked at various constellations that they had. There are others who should be listed. There is Harini Kalamur, who has come with us on some excursions. Jatin Acharya, who was there for Nicobar trip. There is Avaredi, whom I should remember because he was in charge of at Nicobar Islands, and he helped us study the Nicobarese astronomy. And Wayne Orcheston from Thailand, with whom we have collaborated on some of these projects. So let me begin by saying, talk about tribal astronomy. All astronomy that we studied, like I said, can be traced back to the origin in Mesopotamia in 3000 BC. It was then developed by different cultures in their own way and perception, but the broad agreement was there in the division of the sky into various constellations. They were, of course, exactly marked, separated and exactly marked out, etc. only in 1930s, when the International Astronomical Union came into being, and people, all astronomers from various countries got together. But the broad division of the sky into various constellations was something that was done by Babylonians. And it's very similar to all the main cultures around the world. So they may name them differently, they may see different entities in that shape, but the shape was defined at that time. That division was designed at that time. But isolated tribes, they develop their own perspective of the sky, and that is what we are going to look at. And it makes certainly a very fascinating story, at least as far as I'm concerned. So we have been studying astronomy of various tribes. We have gone through about 10 tribes. In Central Asia, India, near Nagpur, Andhra Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh, we have studied Gonds, Banjara, Kolam, Korku, Pardi, and Chol Naikans. Chol Naikans is the one we studied in Calicut. And then in Western India, we have looked at Warli, Dhodia, Katkari, Konkana, and in Nicobar, Nicobaris. And then in Northern Maharashtra, we have looked at Bil, Pavra, and Konkani. Out of these 13 tribes that we have sort of looked at, I'm going to not talk about Chol Naikans, because Chol Naikans are an interesting tribe. I mean, being in Kazikode, you would probably know that they are one of the most isolated tribes of India, and the government, and they live in caves in isolated forests, and the government of India has banned people from contacting them. Only a handful of government officers meet their representatives far away from their place of residence and help them if they need medicines or other things, etc., and give them some tools to help them live, etc. But they live in an environment which is dominated by elephants. So foraging in the forest is the only provision they have. They can't become farmers because the elephant simply would walk over their farms and so on. So they are entirely dependent on foraging the forest, and the government has identified and reserved a part of the forest in which no other people are allowed to go, and given exclusively to Chol Naikans. But once a year, the government brings a few of them to Calicut, and that is where we had the privilege of meeting them. And Jayant, etc., Jayant Goswami and others were there, Ramchandran and all. there are apparently just 175 Chol Nayakans remaining, and until recently, even the tradition of wearing clothes did not exist amongst them. And there are some early photographs of Chol Nayakans without clothes, because that is how they lived, completely in resonance with nature and completely indifferent to everything else. Unfortunately, the knowledge, when we try to understand it, their understanding of the skies was not very deep, and they were essentially more worried about developing little technologies for their own survival, for water transportation, etc. And therefore we could not get much by way of astronomy from them. But so I will not talk about Chol Nayakans. Similarly, Dodia and Kokana, we have interviewed only a couple of villages in those communities, and therefore we do not have enough data to talk about them. And we generally like to have a story confirmed by at least 5 or 10, preferably 10 villages, before we assign a story to a particular community, because quite often an individual may have an imagination which is creative, but which may not reflect the real belief of that community. So we look at astronomical beliefs of only when we have sufficiently large data. We have done some work in North Maharashtra recently, but we are still studying that data, so I don't have much to show for it. But I will restrict to this 8 tribes: Gond, Banjara, Kolam, Korku, Pardi, Warli, Katkari, and Nicobaris, and we will see how they vary and how they add up to something interesting. So let me begin with Gonds, who have probably the most extensive knowledge of astronomy. And over here, let me take a laser pointer. Over here, you can see a picture of them sitting at the planetarium that I was talking to you about. So this is the Nagpur planetarium where they sat, and for 3 days they told us the stories about their community. These were the ladies who had come. There were men there, there were ladies there. It was a mixed group. So the Gonds have a very peculiar temple, if you're a place of worship, which is not like a temple in the real sense of the word. So they have this symbol, which is an eternal symbol of Gonds, where there is a moon and there is apparently sun, and there is a lingam over here, which is really not connected to Shaivism. They have their own religious belief systems and knowledge systems and so on. And they also have a little emblem of a tiger eating an elephant, I think, which is different. And they have their own method of worship and so on. And some of them will also tell you that this looks like a reproductive process of humans and so all that, and human beings are brought from the skies and so various stories are associated with Gonds. But this is one of the telling symbols of Gond community. This is a typical village of a rich Gond person. The first thing you will notice is how beautifully it is set up, how large it is. In a city like Mumbai, if you wanted a house like this, it would probably cost tens of crores of rupees. And it is beautifully adapted to the local environment, because they have waterproof their roofs with these local mud bricks, and they have this little window open over here so that the air is always fresh and clean in their houses. And this, of course, is one of the richest men there, and we interviewed a lot of Gonds in this house. That is why it's favorite of mine. But you can see how beautiful, how neatly kept. The front lawn is also very neatly kept. There is some amount of animal refuse here, but otherwise it is neat and tidy. On the side you would have some animals, and especially cows and things. So let me look at Gonds first. Gonds are one of the oldest and the largest tribes of India. They claim their roots back to prehistoric period. They believe they've always been here around from as far back into time as you can see. They also claim, incidentally, their kinship to various communities. So they claim they had a very large kingdom in central India around the time the Mughals came. So eventually, when Mughals were ruling Delhi, the Gond kingdom went all the way from eastern Maharashtra to Madhya Pradesh and to Chhattisgarh and so on. And there they had there are some very beautiful palaces and houses for queens, etc., that you can see if you go to that part of the world. Unfortunately, we really don't go to that part of the world, and so we don't see them. But we have seen some really lovely, well-built palaces that have stood the test of time for centuries now. And these one of the palaces that we visited actually had a place to mount, which was on the second floor, because it allowed them to mount a elephant directly. So the elephant didn't have to sit down. The elephant just came to a side, and people just walked onto that elephant and sat there. So they were large, very sophisticated structures, plus of course mounts for horses and so on. And they were eventually undone by the Bhosle kingdoms, the Shivaji and all that. Just give me a second, please. So you can see them today. So eventually, the Bhosles would conquer the central India and Telangana and so on. That is where their kingdom ended. But they had a very large kingdom at one stage, and so they are the largest tribal group, and therefore they are the main keepers of keepers of India's wild forest. So they live in many areas which are reserved forests, and in some areas even in the core reserved forest where nobody is allowed to go, and only the natural expansion of people are allowed, which is not very severe. So they live completely isolated. Just about narrow, uneven roads for minimum transport live there, but they live genuinely isolated lives in many parts. In many parts, of course, they are also close to urban centers in which the education has come, electricity has come, and so on, and therefore their ideas have also become modernized. The group that we studied were invariably ones that were isolated and therefore not affected by the new education and new thinking and the mainstream thinking, etc., not by people who were embarrassed by modern knowledge and people who still young children, of course, once they went to education, thought that their own tribal beliefs were not very relevant and they would switch to modern things. So we essentially went to isolated places where they were still untouched by these modern fashions. This is the tribal spread of the Gonds that you can see. As you can see, they are right over in Chhattisgarh and Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh. And we visited them in Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, and a bit in Madhya Pradesh. We didn't go to Chhattisgarh, but we went to a vertical line around Nagpur and visited these communities there. To them, for now, I'm assuming that you have some basic idea of astronomy, so I'm going to simply use astronomical constellations together. They believe that Big Dipper, Saptarshi, represents an old lady in a cot, and the constellation and the three stars behind it are essentially three thieves. So these four stars together represent actually an old lady's cot. And the idea is that the lady is not allowed to sleep, because if the lady sleeps, then these three thieves will steal the cot made of precious metal, and therefore there'll be all hell will break loose. So this lady who sits on this cot is not allowed to sleep, or this constellation is not allowed to set at night. Because if it sets at night, essentially the lady has gone to sleep and all hell will break loose. And these three thieves will come and steal her precious cot, because each leg of the cot is made with gold, silver, and other precious metals. So they divide this constellation into two. One is an old lady's cot, like I said, and the other one is thieves trying to save her. Now, if you look at central India, this constellation now sets. Because of the precession of the earth, the sky changes a little over centuries. And in 1000 BC, that is 3000 years ago, this constellation never set in central India. And therefore, we can simply say that this constellation, the Gonds still have a memory of this constellation not setting in the night sky, which last happened in 1000 BC. So even though they continue with this story, they ignore the fact that now the sun is setting. They just tell themselves that no, this constellation is not setting, and therefore the old lady is not sleeping. Because if you miss winter times, you would see this constellation in the sky for most of the night, because it's circumpolar constellation. At least once you go north, you would see it as circumpolar. So we believe that this is a memory of an event that the last occurred in 1000 BC. when this constellation didn't set. But they had this idea that the lady sits on this cot and these three thieves are trying to steal it, and therefore the lady is not allowed to sleep, which, like I said, happened last in 1000 BC. Now it is no longer true, in the sense that the constellation also sets at night on occasions, and therefore actually disappears below the horizon, and therefore the old lady sleeps, if you wish, but they remember the time when the old lady did not sleep. They also have other interesting belief systems. So this is a very common region of the sky. Everybody, if you start looking at the sky, the first thing you would notice is this circle of stars that we call Pleiades. Then you would notice this Aldebaran, which is a very bright star in the night sky, and Sirius over here, which is the brightest star in the night sky. Plus, you have these three beautiful stars in a straight line, which you can see very clearly, and a kind of vertical to nearly vertical to that is another one. And normally we associate this with the hunter, this with a deer, and so on. There are other stories where, in fact, this is Shiva, and this is the story of the Bilva Patra and the deer who kept its promise, and so on. So various stories are there in various in Hindu mythology about these. Betelgeuse and Raigel form essentially the shoulder of this hunter, and so on, and this is the head of the hunter. But to Cones, this is completely different. To Gonds, these three stars are the stars that go in the plow to till the land. Because they are a farming community, they can see farming everywhere. So these are the three stars that till the land. This is the plow which sort of so these are the plow that goes behind it, which actually digs out the land, and you have a basket for harvesting and the collection over here, and you have an arrangement for dropping the husk in the wind over here, so that you collect the harvest in the basket. So the husk is thrown from over here and it is collected in this basket while the farming is done over here. Aldebaran to them is actually a bird's nest in which there are a couple of eggs, and these birds would obviously like to eat the harvest that you have carefully collected, and therefore Pleiades are the bunch of stones that are thrown by these harvesters to shoo away the bird. So the whole thing is now a farming scene, where you have a plow over here, you have the actual plowing work being done over here. There's de-husking going on here. There's collection of harvest going over here. These are the animals that help you with plowing. Then you have a kind of the chakki in which you make the cow go around, and the oil is kept in the middle, and there it is ground to extract. Oil seeds are kept and allow you to extract the oil, etc. That is over here. The bird's nest is over here. The bird itself sits somewhere over here, and these are a bunch of stones that are thrown to shoo away the birds. So they actually have this idea that you throw the stone and then they fall, the bird will run away, because the bird's nest is over here and the bird is over here, while all the farming is happening over here. Then for Leo, which we would connect like this, we would have a lion with its mane over here and the two legs sitting over here. To them, it's a completely different scene. To them, this is a funeral procession of a murda. So you have the murda over here. So these four stars make the murda. This is the person who is the flag bearer, the person who generally carries the fire in any cremation. This is the flag bearer. These are the four people who are carrying the body. The body is over here. Over here you have the rudalis that are there in many religious customs, where they are professionals who essentially cry on behalf of the community for the person who is dead, and this is the procession of the family members who are following this dead. And it's an unusual thing to do, to put a dead body in the sky. And the reason why they do it is that they say that it is a reminder to us that if you do not respect nature, this is what nature will do to you, and therefore you should always remember that even in heaven, if you are ill behaved, you will die, and therefore you should not drift from your moral duties. And therefore they have this dead body in the sky, which they would regularly see. So their major beliefs are that they see Venus as both Phatak Sukum, that is evening star, and morning star. So Pahate is Gujarat, in Marathi also is morning. Pahat Sukum is a star that appears in the morning, and when it appears in the evening, it is called Jevan Tara. So that is the time you have your dinner and pack up. When Pahad Sukum is seen, or the star is seen early in the morning, that is the time when you would begin to get up, clean up, and start going to the farming, because the sunrise would come soon. They look at monsoon by predicting the glow around the moon, and I will explain that in another slide soon. To Big Dipper, to them, like I said, is a precious cot with an a precious cot with an old lady on it, and the thieves who want to steal it, and therefore this constellation is not allowed to sink. Ora and Taurus, Canis Major, and Pleiades is a complete farming scene in great detail that I just showed you. Theo to them is a murda, a dead body with complete funerary procession. So there are rudalis, there are families, there are somebody who's carrying the fire, and so on. Comets and Milky Way and shooting star have their own beliefs. So they believe comets are the great broom sent by the god to clean up the way. Milky Way to them and to many communities in that area is essentially path of the animals. So the dead animals in the heavens walk along this path to go wherever they are going. And shooting star to them is excreta of stars. So they get quite embarrassed about shooting stars, because that is when gods are throwing their excreta to the earth. The next community that I want to talk to you about is Banjaras. Banjaras are also one of the largest tribes of India. Banjaras were essentially like gypsies of India, and they also claim kinship to gypsies in India. To gypsies in Europe, I beg your pardon. So they are like gypsies of Europe, who essentially travel from one place to another, carrying one of the primary thing they carry is salt from the seas to the inland places. So they are essentially wanderers, and because they are wanderers, but they are rich, they are traditionally traders and movers of good over large stretches of land. And until the railways came to India about 100 years ago, they were the primary source of business commodity connectivity across the continent, across the subcontinent, and therefore they had a very important role to play. And they very proudly talk about how they were allowed into opposing camps of warriors, because both any two armies that were fighting needed supplies, and Banjaras were trusted for providing the material, and therefore they were allowed to go across warring lines even among the great wars in historical period. Some of them claim their roots to 1200 BC AD. They remember with having come with Rana Pratap and Rajputs and so on, and when the Rajputs were defeated by Mughals, they essentially spread away. But another group claims its roots all the way to the Harappan period. And there are subtle signs of the way they worship gods, etc., which suggests that some of the things that they do may well be similar to what Harappans were doing. And so there is one group that claims kinship to the Harappan period and the business that they did at Harappan times with the Harappan civilization and the towns and villages that were around Harappan. After all, everything was not Harappan during Harappan period. There were tribes in various parts of the country, including Gujarat and Rajasthan, etc. There were tribes that were living on their own, but when they had surplus, they would send it to Harappans. And at that time also, they claimed that it was Banjaras who took the material from one place to another. They were forced to settle down, of course, once the railways made them redundant about 100 years ago, and the government has gone to great lengths to provide them with land and farming and so on, so that they can be self-sustaining. But it is a community that is rich. It has always been rich, and therefore it is very powerful. And normally in their olden days, they would travel from one place to another, so they didn't have permanent households. And a large group of gypsies would be called. They would call their group as a jata, and these jata would go from one place to another, settling down only for the 3-4 months of monsoon and then moving again. So even today they refer to their villages as jatas, and they hope that at some day they can even sort of lift everything off and start again. But that seems unlikely given the railways, which are far more efficient at transporting material than Banjaras could be. But Banjaras names itself has a variety of origin. Also some suggesting that they were foresters, some suggesting they came from forests with goods and so on, and various meanings have been associated with them. They are so this is a picture of a typical Banjara village. You would see that the housing is not that grandiose.
Your voice is not heard.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, good. So these are the toilets, etc. And this is the very beautifully built houses, clean, small, but very efficient housing. And they would typically be next to a large river or so, because they depended on they didn't bother about wells and other technologies of getting water from underneath. So they essentially live next to rivers. This is the spread of Banjaras in India. You can see them spread all over the country with reasonable intensity. The largest group is in southern Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. Nagpur is somewhere over here. So we went south of Nagpur and studied this community over here. Banjaras have an interesting stories about the moon. On the moon, they can see an old lady weaving cloth under the shadow of a banyan tree. And that banyan tree is of great interest to them for the reasons of forecasting monsoon and all that. And I'll come to that in the little while. So the other communities see all kinds of things. To Banjaras, this is a lady who is weaving cloth, and on top is this banyan tree. This is the northern region of the sky. If you're a little careful, this slide is not very good, but you can see that there is Saptarshi over here. And this is the Big Dipper, the three thieves of Gonds, and the court of the old lady. Over here is the Milky Way galaxy, and this is the exact north. So there you would see this cot, and you would see the moon. To them, this is the cot of the dead. Now there is no longer a lady who cannot sleep, and there is no longer a set of thieves. These are now a bunch of mourners going behind this cot of the dead. And the dead, once the person is dead, he or she is released from this cot and eventually travels along the north to the path of the dead. So to them, the Milky Way is the path of the dead. It is not the path of animals, but now it is the path of dead, on the way for this dead person to go to the heaven. To them, the Orion region is an arrow piercing a deer, which is very similar to the mainstream beliefs. They do not have any other stories to tell, but to them, this Pleiades is a jewelry piece worn by women on their head. So if you look at this women in the forehead, they have this little jhumka, and they think this is the jhumka. Obviously, they are Banjaras, they are businessmen. They would see more of jewelry and wealth in space rather than worry about farming and so on. So this Pleiades to them is a jhumka. They decide the intensity of rains by deciding where the crow has built its nest in May. So if it is on the top, then the crow is not expecting very severe rains, because the nest will be quite safe and so on. So if the crow's nest is on the top, they believe that there will be less rain this year. If it is at the bottom, then they think there will be intense rains at that particular. So here this means intense rains. This means lesser rains. And if the wind comes from the western direction, then they think it's going to be a bad monsoon. If the wind comes from the direction so if the nest is on the top and the wind is coming from X direction, from west, essentially they think it's going to be a poor monsoon. If the nest is down here, then they expect the winds to be good and they expect a heavy monsoon. So they think the crows know well in advance about the kind of monsoon they are going to have. And if that is true, poor crows must be this year building their nest all the way down here, because the rain has been really, really intense. Their important beliefs are, again, the morning star and the evening star. Venus is something that is noted by everybody. Sorry, and they call it a Shubhatara. They are no longer worried about starting farming with the morning star or having dinner with the evening star. To them, it is a Porya Tara, the child star, because it goes from here to here and disappears and so on, but is generally considered a good star. Orion to them is a Harini or Hiran, if you wish, a deer. The moon is a disk with an old lady and a tree. Pleiades to them, like I said, is Jumko Tara, a piece of jewelry worn by women on their forehead. Comets is simply a Sheshar Tara, or a star with a tail, and they don't have any particular beliefs on whether it's a good omen or a bad omen. Shooting star are essentially falling stars. It doesn't interest them much. It is simply a star that has fallen. It has no associated stories with that. Big Dipper, like I said, is Jamkhat or Yamkhat. Jamkhat or Yamkhat, because that is where the funeral body is taken, and eventually it goes on the path of the dead along the Milky Way galaxy. Milky Way to them is a Mardarvat, or the path of the dead. And monsoon, like I said, is predicted by the glow around the moon, and I will explain that in a little while. And the direction of monsoon rains and the intensity is predicted by looking at how the crow's nest is built. Taurus, and they believe that rains will come when Taurus is seen in the east. The implications are that because their interest in farming is new, because they only recently lost their original trading activity, their astronomical knowledge is limited. They see trade and wealth everywhere in the sky, and their astronomical predictions are based more on terrestrial events than on astronomical events. Kolam, on the other hand, is another community. It's a relatively small community. Once upon a time, when Gonds were very rich, Kolams actually performed the duty of priests for the Gonds. Until about 50 years ago, they were foragers, so they did not have permanent residence. They went to the forest, and whatever forage produces, like fruits and twigs, etc., that they could pick up, they would use that and have their livelihood. So it is only 50 years ago that government eventually began a systematic plan to settle them. So their houses were essentially those built by using local material, but by government sponsored activities. They themselves would have liked to continue to be foragers. And when you meet the elders amongst the Kolams, they will actually tell us about the time as young child they used to go around the forest with their entire family and move from place to place, and they didn't have a fixed place of residence and so on, and how that life was much better than the current life, where because it is sedentary, people tend to become fat and become lethargic and so on. Many elders remember the time of foraging and wandering lifestyle, and like all elders, they regret this new lifestyle that they have got. And this is a typical kind of village you would see. The houses are of moderate sizes, but the general layout is obviously designed by some government officer, deciding that along this path you will fulfill the city, and on either side you will make houses for the tribals to live in. Houses that are sustainable and repairable by local resources, and they have this nice cots, etc., on which they can live comfortably. And they even have here, for example, a solar paneled light source and so on. Kolams are confined to a rather small region in Maharashtra, in western Maharashtra, overlapping with Gonds. So we have come across villages where on one side there were Gonds, predominantly Gonds, on the other side were predominantly Kolams, but they would not talk to each other except for an occasional shop or something. And both tribes, Gonds and Kolams, practice serious, strict monogamy, endogamy. So Gonds were only allowed to marry Gonds, and Kolams were only allowed to marry Kolams. So even on a given highway, you would find two different villages of the two different communities. The two communities barely talk to each other or barely exchange ideas or anything. So you could find completely different beliefs on two sides of the road, where the Gonds had one set of astronomical beliefs, Kolams had another set of astronomical beliefs. And because both are endogamous, those traditions tended to be continued. To them, the Pleiades is just an interesting collection, and as you would imagine, they think of them simply as a bunch of birds flying in the sky. They are not worried about them eating up your products or anything of that sort, and therefore they are just and there's nothing very particularly beautiful about a jewelry or something, which Banjaras would have. To them, it is simply a collection of stars. And then to them, Saptarshi is a court, and this time there is a Kolam, Gond, and a Pradhan, which is a third community there, going to pay their respects to the person who is on the court. They have an interesting belief about the sun. So if there is a total solar eclipse, then it's a good omen. But if there is solar eclipse which is only on the top of the sun, then it is bad for humans, because the tax collector has come to collect the returns for all the sins of humans, and if only half of it has been paid, then that is bad for humans. So if the top half is covered, it is bad for humans. If only the bottom half is covered, it is bad for animals. So eclipses is something they look at very with great interest. They have an interesting belief that Pegasus, the great square of Pegasus, is actually a sea that provides the rains. And around it are animals. So there is peacock, there is a buffalo, there is a frog, there is a deer, and then there is a horse or a wild ass around these things. If at near the time of monsoon, if these two constellations are bright, either the horse or the peacock, then they believe that the monsoon will be poor. On the other hand, if the frog is bright, then they expect the monsoon to be very good. And so frog and buffalo gives you excellent monsoon, deer gives you an average monsoon, and the horse or the peacock gives you poor monsoon. And this is simply related to the fact that are you getting the breeze from the seaside, which would be moisture carrying, or whether you're getting breeze from the land side, which essentially would be dry air. And even though they are not bothered about the physics of it, over decades of observations, they have learned that if the wind comes from the northern side or the eastern side, then it is so the east is over here. So if the wind comes from the eastern side, they essentially is a landlocked side, and therefore you will get poor monsoon. If the wind comes from the western side, then these constellations will be very bright because the clouds will clear them, and therefore you will get a good monsoon. Some places people put pig instead of deer, but those are instead of the horse. But the idea is still the same. And the exact location of the animal, of course, is we have to extract it from the discussion, but we think it's fairly accurate. Some other people associate the same thing not with Pegasus but with Centaurus. But we believe Pegasus is the more correct one. Again, the same set of stories are there about which is good or not. But whether it is a square of Pegasus or whether it is the triangle of Centaurus is something that needs to be sorted out. Then to them, Scorpia, the constellation of Scorpius over here, it looks like a snake to them. It is not a scorpion, but it is a snake, which is much larger, as you can see. You can see the complete fangs of the snake over here. Then Cygnus to them is simply 3 pods put on top of each other. While the most stories will tell you about a swan that is flying in the sky, to them it is simply 3 pods put on top of each other. And this is what I've been meaning when I say glow around the moon. So you have the moon over here. If the glow, if the glow is very far, then the monsoon, then it's going to be a good rain. If the glow is very close to the moon, then it's a bad rain. Not much rain is expected, and that in some sense is strictly associated with the cloud cover that you have between you and the moon. If the cloud cover is very thick, then typically the glow would be much larger. If the cloud cover is very thin, the glow would be very small, and therefore you would see this kind of effects. Then I'll come to Kolam. I'm really running short of time, so I'll come to Kolam very quickly. They think Pleiades again is just a collection of birds, one large one, other small one. Then there is Saptarshi is the cot with 3 people walking on it. Orion is simply a Tipan, collection of 3 stars without much story to it. Morning and evening star is Vegul, Jevan Sukha for evening and Vegul star for the morning. Solar eclipse, they have special beliefs, which I already told you. And then Pegasus, and I told you. They also believe Crux, which is a constellation in the southern sky, to be a mahua tree. And there are people collecting the mahua fruit, which they use and ferment and use as alcohol. Milky Way is a path of the dead, like I told you, and Scorpio is a snake, and Cygnus is a collection of 3 pods. Korku is the next type that I want to talk to you about. Korku is also inhabit the same region of the sky. They trace their origin to eastern Indian region of Chota Nagpur. And unlike Gonds, who are Indo-European in origin, or even Kolam, who are Indo-European origin, this group genetically is Austro-Asian in origin. So their connection goes to people of East Asia and Southeast Asia. They have many astronomical beliefs. That includes Big Dipper as a cot, which is similar to the Gonds. The Orion to them is a farming scene, and Pleiades for them is a minced meat. It is no longer the birds, etc., but that is where the gods have minced their meat and made it ready for eating. One unusual belief is that the effect of eclipse on life on Earth. The second is that they believe that conjunction of Mars and Venus, which happens every 1.7 years, is a good one. So if Mars and Venus are coming closer to each other, it means that the great 2 lovers in the sky are coming together, and therefore it's a good season for marriage. If Mars and Venus are running away from each other, it's essentially a means that it's a time of family discord, and therefore there would not be any marriages during the time when Mars and Venus are far away. To them, for example, this farming scene, the Gonds is slightly different. You have the plow over here, you have the bullocks over here, but now instead of Sirius, they go further north, and to them the Gemini, the two sisters of Gemini are two ladies carrying the water. Then there is a whip over here being used on these bullocks to make them move. Pleiades now becomes minced meat, like I said, and the head of Taurus becomes bird eggs as an independent entity. To them, this region is Capella, and other region is a huge well from which they drive water in order to have their farming. So their perspective of sky is now more vertical. Much larger region of the sky is covered, and the beliefs are slightly different. But for example, they completely miss out on Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, and so on. Then there are Pardi. Pardis are Indo-European in origin. They claim their ancestry to the Rajput kings who lost to Mughals. They were classified as a criminal tribe by the British. Now that label is no longer there, but that sense of hurt is still there. And if you ask to the local police, they would still have that bias against Pardis. Their main beliefs are that Big Dipper is a bed, Orion are deers, Taurus is a bird trap, and I'll show you that picture. So to them, this Taurus now is a bird trap made by the gods to catch their own set of birds because they want food, and this is how they replicate it on Earth. So there is one person who wears this shield so that the man is not seen, and through this window he will shoo all the birds towards this net and this Y-shaped trap, so that the birds, while running, it would run through this hole and get trapped over here. And they think that this is the correct way of catching the birds because that is how the gods do it. So they have replicated the gods' way of catching birds for their food on the ground. I can do a comparative study of the beliefs of these three tribes, but I'm going to skip that simply because of time. Then if you look at, I will look at the tribes now of Western India. Katkari to them is a cot of four legs. And then you have now the three warriors behind it are Koli, Warli, and Konkana, who are all three local people. And incidentally, they are the only ones who notice that the Warli, the middle star, actually has brought his son with him. So it's a double star. Others have not noticed it, but Katkari actually noticed that middle star is a double star. To them, Orion belt is a bow and a sword is the arrow. Pleiades to them is a Maharpunj. It's a big drum. So they have an entire wedding procession in the Taurus Pleiades region, and I think I have a picture of that. Scorpios is Scorpio. Sirius is simply a bright star of no great interest. Glow around the moon is something they also believe in. And eclipses, they have an interesting belief that during eclipses, sorry, where is that picture gone? I've got my slides wrong. Okay. So they have the belief, this is Korku, they have a similar belief to Korku, which is that during an eclipse, if you put one of these rods on the ground with in a vessel with water down, then as long as the eclipse is on, this will remain vertical. And only when this eclipse is over will this shaft fall on its own, and depending on whether it falls to the north or the south, it is a good omen or a bad omen. And Pardi also, Katkari also have a similar belief about eclipses and so on. So if you put a heavy wooden stick, it will be kept vertical by the eclipse itself, and then it will drop down, and depend on how it drops, you have good omen or bad omen. And we've really not figured out exactly what this means, but we have heard it in many, many villages where people have talked about this. Milky Way now is the path of the god, and shooting stars, they believe, our gods are going from one place to another. And when gods are doing that, you must keep quiet so as not to disturb them, and never point at a shooting star because it is bad omen to point out a god in the sky. And if you want, you can offer some food to the gods while they are traveling, because if they are making a long journey. But to them, shooting stars are gods going from one place to another. It's a time of quiet and peace. It's a time you don't talk, and it's a time that you can offer food to the gods to help them in their journey. Comets are brooms, and that will sort of destroy everything and a bad omen. Varli on the other side is also another Indo-European tribe. They are a scheduled tribe, essentially Nashik and Dhule region, and they're more famous for their Varli paintings. But they're also settled in Daman and Diu and Dadra and Nagar Haveli, etc. They speak an interesting language. If you go there and listen to them, it makes a very interesting reading because they speak this very peculiar mix of Indo-Aryan languages, which has a mix of all kinds of languages in it. The name Varli itself comes from the Varla, which means a piece of land. So they are essentially farmers, and agriculture is their primary source of income. And they have a very distinct style of painting for which they are known. The only astronomical object they ever draw in their painting, incidentally, is sun, and rarely do they draw moon. But they are not given to drawing skies in their Varli paintings, because if you look at Varli paintings, there are very peculiar projection of real life activities and so on, and they do not have this three-dimensional depth effect, etc. So within that, there is no need for them to represent the sky and all that. So given that they do not paint sky. They do not paint astronomy or sky patterns in their drawing. They believe that the quadrilateral of the Big Dipper is a cot and the three trailing stars are the three thieves. To them, interestingly, Gemini or Taurus Pleiades region is a marriage procession in which the bride and the groom and a band of musicians in a marriage hall. Where Pleiades itself plays the drums with musician, Taurus is a groom, and the bride is Hydem, the other star in Taurus. The wedding hall is in Gemini, so they are essentially going towards this Gemini. And the mark on the moon this time identify people tree, and most of the villages see a woman being hanging there, and they have a story about a woman who was of loose morals, etc., and eventually she was hung by the tree, and that is what you see there. Eclipse to them is a bad omen because a demon arises and eats up the sun and the moon, and it comes if the sun or the moon comes out in the eastern direction, then the demon is said to have vomited the moon. If it comes out in the western dimension, then the demon is supposed to have excreted the moon or the sun. Comet they consider as a bad omen, and shooting stars are believed to be transport used by gods from going to one location to another. To them, this is the procession that I was talking about. So you have a marriage hall in Gemini. Now the three stars are still deer, but over here you have this drum. So they either a deer or a drummer or various interpretations are there. But this is the marriage band, and this is the bride and the groom over here. Over here are the drummers that are actually going with this bride and the groom who are going to Gemini to get married. And these are the family members and so on. So they have a different perspective of the sky. People of Nicobar, on the other hand, have really run out of time. So let me try and quickly finish. Are Austro-Asian in origin, and they believe that they came from Myanmar and all that. You can go to Andaman, but going to Nicobar requires special permission, and we went to Nicobar. They are essentially seafarers. So apart from sun and the moon, the primary objects of interest to them in the sky is the constellation that gives them north and the south. So the sun, they believe that the sun was banished to the sky since it became very hot and was not allowed to stay on Earth. The moon has two brothers sleeping on it, who were unfairly banished from Earth and have had to use spider webs to go to the moon, and they now sleep on the moon. To them, eclipses are interesting but not very great stories. Shooting stars, etc., does not really occupy their mind. If you look at the constellations, etc., they are not of great interest to them. Their primary interest is this Saptarshi, and their other interest is Crux, because that gives you the north and the southern pattern of the sky. Otherwise, Belt of Orion, etc., something they are not interested in. They insisted that all of them whom we met were rather youngsters, and they said our ancestors had a lot of knowledge of it, but they are now all dead and gone, so there is not much they can give us. Even then, to them, the region of Taurus and Orion is the same. Here they have a stick of a king, and this Pleiades to Aldebaran is the path along which the king is moving, and this is the stick on which he moves, and he looks after the well-being of the people. So just to summarize, over here I have the picture of the entire sky. The red circles are the constellations which are seen by many, many tribes. So there is Orion over here. This is Belt of Orion over here. Taurus is over here, and so on. Pegasus is seen only by one constellation. Scorpion simply is seen by 2 or 3 tribes, and Leo again is only Gonds who see Leo. So while many of the constellations are seen by many people, some are unique to individual groups. Many of them incidentally don't notice Pleiades because their astronomy is much earlier Polaris. Sorry, many of them don't notice Polaris because their astronomy is older, and Polaris became a pole star only about a few hundred years ago. So many of them don't know Polaris. Also, they know constellations which are largely near monsoon constellations. So the constellations that start rising in December, January, and would start setting at the morning at the time when the monsoon is about to come. So their preoccupation of the sky is essentially winter sky and pre-monsoon sky. Just to repeat, Banjaras think that this Pleiades is a jewelry piece. Kolams think it's a bunch of birds. Korku think it's minced meat. Gonds think it's birds, stones thrown at the bird. Varli think it's a lamp or a drum. Nicobarese people think that it is the king or a group of ancestors looking after them. Parthi think that these are babble birds, babbler birds who are in the sky. And the conventional belief, of course, is these are the 6 wives of the 6 of the 7 rishis, and there's a complicated story with that. When they leave their husbands out of disappointment, they come and stay as Pleiades. So the same sky, the same region of the sky, the same constellation looks very different depending on what your personal perspective is. So the bottom line is it is clear that the communities go by their own beliefs, and their beliefs can be simply daytime keepers about Venus, or calendrical about the moonrise and the monsoons, or they can express human activities in Tippan or related groups. They can have mythologies about comets, Milky Way, and shooting star. They also have some cosmogony about what brooms do and what Ursa Major does, and or what Leo does, and so on. They have eclipse. Then there are stories of eclipses and shooting stars. Annual repetition of the scene means that the knowledge is better because they see the sky every day. These traditions are not forgotten very easily amongst the elders, at least, because they see the sky every year. So the stories keep on getting reminded. Some overlap with different cultures. For example, a Kot and Ursa Major and so on. Some do not. But I'm not going to dwell much on it because I've already overshot my time. So what I want to show you is this. You can actually quantify their sanctity. You can say how many years in this group is settled and quantify how much astronomy they know. So do they know, for example, the name of directions? Do they know constellations? Do they know few constellations or lots of constellations? Do they use astronomy in daily life? Do they have myths about astronomy, etc.? And you can quantify how much astronomy they know. And when you do that, you end up with this interesting graph. The tribals of India who are not settled for very long are over here, and the urban populations of the world are over here. And that includes European urban populations and so on. You can see that the astronomical knowledge simply rises with the amount of time for which you are settled. The more settled you are, the more profound is your astronomical knowledge. And you can actually use this, and the fit is so good that you can use it as a calibration, in the sense that if I know how long a community is settled, I can tell you how sophisticated their astronomy will be in terms of knowing constellations and so on. And if I know how much constellations, etc., a community knows, I can tell you how many centuries they have settled for. It is that strong a correlation. And then many of these tribes, as my last point to make, have this spirit houses. So amongst Banjaras, this is in the out of the town where the ancestors are kept. Amongst Gonds, they are individualized. In Korku, they are simply kept as graves, as marker stones. The bodies are cremated most often, or sometimes buried, but they have markers like these, and which is very similar to the traditions in Southeast Asia, where they have these kind of spirit houses just outside the house, where the ancestors sit and prevent bad omens from coming into the house. So most houses in Southeast Asia you will find have this kind of spirit houses. So these kind of relations across cultures have still not been explored because of our own astronomies are not fully documented. And so we need to do this, we need to understand this. Because as the government's effort to integrate these populations into the mainstream comes up, these groups are beginning to forget their roots. So we are really losing some good traditional knowledge very quickly, and it is important to document it very quickly. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, we can talk.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for a very informative talk. And Now we are expecting questions from the audience. You can type the questions in the chat box, or you can directly unmute yourself and ask. One question is there from Atul Bhatt. He has typed the question here. He says that how would the sophistication of the knowledge of astronomy be defined for each tribe?
So we have several parameters. One thing is whether they know directions. Second thing is whether they know constellations. One less than 3 constellations, 3 to 5 constellations, 5 to 10 constellations, and so on. The third thing is, do you have mythological stories associated with the sky, and what is the level of sophistication of that story? Is it just about J1 Tara and Sukum Tara, morning star, evening star, or do they have more interesting ideas like Venus and Mars coming together, or even more interesting ideas like bodies in the sky, or even ideas about Saptarshi, whether they have an idea about a cot and the 3 people following it. And so sophistication of astronomical ideas is the primary concern. But otherwise, at least basic astronomical knowledge and some constellation identification should be there. That is how we define the astronomical sophistication of a culture. Yes.
Achha, you have studied, you said about the Nicobar Island. In Andaman main island, there were Jarvas. So, did you find anything?
We didn't go to Andaman. We stayed with Nicobar Islands only. Okay. So, it is a Nicobar, because Andaman, in principle, there are some regions, of course, which are completely banned. And there you would not even get government permission to go there, because they are essentially headhunters. So, research 5 years ago, some Christian missionary thought he was very smart, tried to circumvent the government laws, and quietly took a boat to the northern Andaman region, and he was killed by the tribals. So northern tribals have tribes which are aggressively isolationist, and so government will not let you go there. In the southern, in the Nicobar Island, the people are a little more friendly, and in fact, Indian Navy also has a base there. And but the people in the naval base at Nicobar are not allowed to go to the mainland of Nicobar, because these tribes have to be kept isolated. And taking permission is a very long and laborious process. But because we had the astronomical knowledge in hand, after almost 1 year of persuasion, we eventually got permission, and that too was highly guarded. The time when India actually went into Nicobar in a big way is when the major tsunami came, and where the youngsters, etc., managed to run to safety, but a lot of elders were lost, and a lot of their habitat and their livelihood was lost. And government therefore came up with a big amount of help to help them sustain. That has also had a counter effect, in the sense that they have become less inclined to work, because you get free government handout, etc. So some of them have become lazy. Alcohol has become a problem, etc. So there are pluses and minuses to everything. But we stayed with Nicobar. We did not go to these Jarvas and others. We were not that keen on knowing astronomy that we would risk our lives.
And one more thing, actually, you skipped the Cholanayakams, but there were 2 things. I think I will just, since the discussion is about tribal, very few things were about astronomy. One was thing that what we found out is that their deceased persons, that the person who are dead, they put it in the west-east direction with the head in the western side, indicating the end of life. So that was one thing which was there. And the shooting stars, that God is sending fire. So these 2.
Sorry. I missed those 2. Yes. Yeah. By the way, this burials is something I did not talk about. The tribes in central India tend to bury their dead north-south, with the leg to the north and head to the south. So in most people would think north is the auspicious side, and south is the inauspicious side, and south is where all kinds of things are there, which are essentially cultural biases. But to the Gonds, etc., the north is the bad side, and now south is the good side, because they live in what is called Dakshin Patha. When the Indo-Europeans started migrating away from the northern India, they came, the opening in the Vindhyas is in central India, so they came through the Dakshin path to southwards, and therefore they brought a lot of violence to them. So to them, the northern direction is a bad direction, and therefore out of expression of contempt, they bury their dead with their leg to the north, unlike other tribes which either do east-west or the other way around, head to the north and legs to the south, etc. And then there are stories of origin, about how they came into being, how God made them, etc., which I have not gone into simply for want of time.
Was a telescope exposed to any tribe and seen how is their reaction to see?
No, we never took it. The idea was not, our idea was very clear. We are going as children and students. We were not going to change their lives. We are not going to impact their lives. We were not going to in any way advise them or do anything with them. We were only going there to listen.
Observers.
So our mission was very clear. We are there as students and as not as somebody who wants to increase contact, etc. We just want to learn, and we had a great time learning, and they really taught us a lot. And one of the brightest persons who I would have loved to take as a PhD student was actually a lady in her early 50s in one of the Gond villages, and she knew the tribal traditions of that community so well that no male could reproduce the stories with the fineness and detail that she would. But she is officially illiterate, so you won't even be allowed into the school. But that doesn't mean that they are not knowledgeable. They are brilliantly knowledgeable, but we don't understand them, and we went to the specific aim of only understanding them, not in any way changing anything that they had. Yeah, Arvind wants to ask a question. Arvind, of course.
Please ask.
Sorry. Yeah, my question was that total solar eclipses are so rare.
Yes.
So you said that there are total solar if the total solar eclipse is good or something. So there must have been accumulated knowledge over a long period of time, isn't it?
It is. It is. I mean, in a given region, you would see an eclipse every
100 years
solar
or
eclipse,
so?
100 years or so. So yes, several 100 years of knowledge has to be accumulated. That's precisely the point. That's precisely the point. Yes, it is several 100 years of accumulated knowledge. And this experiment with this heavy stick is something that I don't have any clue as to what it means. But several tribes, 2 or 3 tribes and several villages have mentioned this to us, but we really don't understand it. And they swear by it, saying, if come at the time of eclipse and I'll show you how it stands on its own. And I really don't know how that would happen.
Actually, on that account, recently Andhashraddha Nirmoolan Samiti people did this experiment during the solar eclipse and after the solar eclipse and showed that it is not true. I think it came into this Marathi Vignan Parishad's bulletin or something.
Okay. No, I would believe it is not true, but the belief is so strong that it is remarkable.
Yeah, and it is quite a widespread belief, actually.
It is.
Yes. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, sir.
Niranjan Sunil wanted to ask a question. Can you ask? Niranjan Sunil?
Good evening, sir. So, a question from my side is, the astronomical belief of Katkari tribe, you had told that of the eclipse. In the eclipse, a heavy wooden stick is kept vertical in water. Of that belief, is it just a belief or is it actually proven, and is it precise?
No, there is no scientific reason why it would be true. And as Arvind Paranjpe said, the Andhashraddha Nirmoolan Samiti actually did that experiment during solar eclipse and showed that it doesn't work. So there is no scientific basis for their belief, but they do believe it.
Okay. I think it is called musar in Marathi, or Hindi also musar. So they put this musar in the water.
Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
Edward Henderson, he has put a comment that requesting, sir, you could please admit in your program, and really I am really excited to join your WhatsApp group from Kerala. I am from Kerala.
Okay. So that Jayant has to note down. Jayant sahab, you have to note down. By the way, if any of you are in contact with any of these communities, please note astronomical beliefs. If you have heard from your grandparents, if you have heard from your friends, if you have heard from your grandparents, please note down, write the name of the community and send it to Jayant sahab. Then we can collate them and see whether what are there, because this knowledge is being lost very quickly. Anything else?
Any other questions?
I'm sorry for overshooting my time.
Okay, so there is no other question. So thank you, sir. I would request formally Mr. Joel George. Joel, you are here? Yeah. Joel George will give a formal vote of thanks. Joel, please.
Good evening, one and all. We had an interesting session today, and I take this opportunity to extend our sincere thanks to our distinguished guest, Dr. Mayank Wahia. It was an excellent session, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I would also like to thank all our viewers who are watching this program in our Google Meet, YouTube, and Facebook channels. Thank you all. We will meet on the next month with another interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.